Some mornings, before I'm fully awake, the day has already started asking things of me. What to wear, what to make, where I put something yesterday. It's quiet, but the questions line up early, and I notice how my body is still slow, while my mind is already busy answering. I move through the house in that half-light way. The kettle clicks on. A chair shifts. Outside, the world is already moving, but inside, everything feels a step behind. It isn't stressful exactly. It's just full. As if my head has reached capacity before anything important has even begun. That's why I like spending time here with you. Not to fix anything. Just to stay with the noticing for a while, and to know you can come back to this space whenever it feels steady enough to hold you. I've learned that tiredness doesn't always come from doing too much. Sometimes it comes from deciding too much, from answering small questions all day long without realizing how many there are. And sometimes ease doesn't arrive through rest alone, but through shaping the day so fewer decisions are needed in the first place. This is why Wise Aging Seniors exists. It's a place for slowing down, for shared experience, for lives that don't look the same but feel familiar in their rhythms. No right way to live, no pace to keep up with. Lately, I've been noticing one small thing. When the day asks less of me early on, I seem to carry myself more gently through everything that follows. Not because life changes, but because something inside me has more room to breathe. And as that space opens, I begin to recognize where it comes from. From a few quiet ways of living I didn't invent, but learned by paying attention. Simple Japanese daily habits that reduce how often the day asks me to decide without asking me to push harder or become someone new. That's what we'll move into next. Habit 1 showed itself to me without effort. I didn't decide to change anything. I just noticed that one part of my day had stopped asking questions. Morning, in particular, had grown quiet in a very specific way. I reach for the same cup without thinking about it, the same place at the table, the same first few movements before the day begins to speak. There's no plan behind it, no rule. It simply happened because it worked once, and then again, and my body remembered before my mind did. What surprised me wasn't the routine itself. It was the feeling that came with it. A small sense of relief, almost unremarkable, but steady, as if something had been lifted before I even realized I'd been carrying it. The choice was gone, and with it, a thin layer of tension I didn't know was there. Nothing else in the morning changes. The day can still be unpredictable. My energy still rises and falls the way it does now. But that first sameness creates a kind of landing place. My mind doesn't rush ahead. It doesn't start sorting and deciding before I'm ready. It simply arrives. I used to think sameness meant dullness, that repeating something meant giving up attention or interest. But this kind of sameness does the opposite. It frees attention. Because I'm not choosing, I'm noticing. The warmth of the cup, the sound of the house waking up, how my shoulders feel today compared to yesterday. There's a kindness in that, especially now when the body prefers gentler starts, when the mind doesn't need to prove anything in the first hour of the day. Letting one part stay the same feels like saying, you don't have to be alert yet, you can ease in. What I didn't expect was how this quiet sameness didn't stay confined to the morning. Later in the day, I found myself less impatient with decisions that couldn't be avoided, less tired by small choices. As if beginning the day without deciding had set a tone that carried forward, lightly without effort. I didn't add discipline, I didn't remove responsibility. I just stopped asking myself one question I didn't need to answer anymore. And that turned out to be enough for the day to feel a little wider, a little less demanding. I notice it now when the morning passes smoothly, and I don't rush to replace it with something new. I let it stay, and I let myself stay with it too, trusting that not everything needs variety to be alive. Some things need steadiness to give us room. Habit 2 didn't arrive as a decision either. It showed up as a feeling in my hands. A pause in front of the wardrobe. A moment in the kitchen when I realized I was tired before I'd even started choosing. There were simply too many things within reach. Not too many to own, just too many to face, all at once. Shirts I rarely wore, but still had to consider. Ingredients that asked questions every time I opened a cupboard. Nothing wrong with them, nothing urgent, just present. What changed was small, almost accidental. I started keeping only a few familiar options where my eyes landed first. The clothes I reach for without thinking. The meals my body already understands. The objects that feel easy in my hands. Everything else stayed, but it stepped back. The first thing I noticed wasn't mental at all. It was physical. My shoulders didn't tighten as much. My breathing stayed even. My hands moved more directly, without hovering. It felt as if my body was relieved not to negotiate. There's something honest about the body that way. It responds before the mind explains. When fewer options are in front of me, I move with more confidence, even when I'm not trying to. I don't stand as long. I don't second-guess myself. I don't feel the quiet pull to reconsider. This wasn't about restriction. Nothing was taken away from me. I didn't lose choice. I delayed it. I gave myself the gift of not seeing everything at once. And in that narrowing, clarity appeared on its own. I used to believe that having many options meant being prepared, that it showed care for the future. But lately, preparation feels different. It feels like knowing what already works and letting that be enough for today. There's a gentleness in that, especially now, when the body prefers fewer decisions and the mind appreciates clear paths. When energy is something to respect, not spend casually. As the days went on, I became curious about how my body responded when choice was limited. Not tense, not bored, but calmer, as if it trusted the space I'd created, as if it knew before I did that fewer options didn't mean less freedom. It meant less effort. I don't rush to expand that space again. I let it stay narrow where it helps, and I notice how much easier it is to move forward when my hands and eyes aren't being asked to choose so much, so often. That feeling lingers quietly, inviting me to pay attention to what truly needs deciding and what doesn't. Habit 3 settled in quietly, the way small truths often do. I didn't announce it or promise myself anything. I just began returning certain things to one trusted place after I used them. Slowly, without urgency, as if the objects themselves had agreed on where they belonged. My keys rest in the same shallow bowl. Glasses return to the same corner of the table. A notebook slides back into its place before the thought of later even forms. There's no hurry in it, no rule being followed. It happens at the pace my hands are already moving. What surprised me was how little effort it took once it became familiar. I wasn't organizing. I wasn't being careful. I was finishing a movement instead of leaving it open. And that small closing felt gentle, almost kind. Later, I noticed the absence of something I'd grown used to, the quiet searching, the pause where I tried to remember, the second-guessing that crept in when I couldn't find what I needed right away. Those moments didn't disappear all at once. They simply stopped appearing as often. There's a relief in not having to re-decide, not having to ask, where did I put that? Or what should I do with this now? The decision had already been made, long before it was needed again, and my mind seemed grateful not to reopen it. This habit didn't change my home in any visible way. The rooms looked much the same, but inside me something felt steadier, as if a few small promises were being kept quietly, without my attention. I began to notice how this carried into other parts of the day. When fewer things were left unfinished, my thoughts wandered less. I felt less scattered, less interrupted by small uncertainties. It wasn't control, it was continuity. There's something comforting about knowing where things will be, especially now when the body appreciates predictability and the mind rests more easily when it doesn't have to hold on to loose ends. Returning things to one trusted place became a way of telling myself, you won't have to think about this again. And then came the realization. The habit wasn't only about objects, it was about endings, about allowing moments to settle instead of hovering. When things return to where they belong, a part of the mind returns too. I didn't rush to apply this everywhere. I let it stay small. I let it remain light. And I noticed how, with fewer searches and fewer reopenings, my attention felt less pulled apart, as if something deeper than objects had found a place to rest. Habit 4 took longer to notice because it went against something I'd carried for years. The idea that leaving things unfinished meant being careless, that rest only came after completion, that if something was open, it should stay on my mind until it was closed. I began to see how many tasks quietly asked for an ending every single day. Letters half read, projects paused, a cupboard that still needed sorting, none of them urgent, none of them dangerous to leave alone. And yet they followed me. Not in my hands, but in my chest. A low, constant pressure to conclude. What shifted wasn't my ability to finish things. It was my willingness to let them rest, to place them down without apology, to say without words, "This doesn't need me right now." At first it felt uncomfortable, like I was breaking an agreement I'd made with myself long ago. But the body responded differently than I expected. My shoulders softened when I allowed a task to stay unfinished. My breathing slowed when I stopped circling back to it mentally. The relief came not from doing less, but from not insisting on an ending where one wasn't required. Some days I leave things exactly where they are. A book with a marker halfway through, a note left open on the table, a thought that hasn't found its shape yet. And instead of feeling messy or unresolved, it feels honest, as if I'm finally matching the pace my body has been asking for. There's a tenderness in that allowance, especially now when energy is more precious and attention doesn't stretch the way it once did. Letting unfinished things rest feels like respecting my limits without having to explain them. I notice something else too. When tasks are allowed to pause, they often return differently, less demanding, more willing to wait. I come back to them with clearer eyes, not because I push them away, but because I trusted they would still be there. This habit carries weight because it touches something deeper than productivity. It challenges the belief that worth comes from completion, that days must be wrapped up neatly to be valid. Allowing things to rest quietly untangles that belief little by little. What surprised me most was realizing that rest didn't have to be a separate reward. It could be built into the way things are handled, into the way days are shaped, into the systems that hold unfinished moments without letting them spill into everything else. I don't rush to finish anymore, just to clear my mind. I let the mind clear by allowing space. And in that space, something gentler takes hold, a sense that not everything needs closure to be at peace. Some things need time to breathe, and so do I. Habit 5 arrived with a small release of tension I hadn't realized I was carrying. It came the day I stopped explaining myself for choosing the same thing again. The same meal, the same clothes, the same timing. Not because I had to, but because it felt right. There was a time when repetition felt like giving up, as if choosing the familiar meant I wasn't paying attention anymore. I used to think variety kept life awake, that changing things proved I was still engaged. But lately, repetition has started to feel like something else entirely. I notice it most around meals, how my body settles when it recognizes what's coming. How there's no inner discussion, no weighing of options, no wondering if I should try harder today. I eat, and the moment is simple. Nourishing without negotiation. The same happens with clothes. I reach for what feels known against my skin. Fabrics that don't surprise me. Shapes that don't ask me to adjust all day. There's a quiet confidence in that choice, even though it looks like sameness from the outside. What surprised me was how much energy this saved. Not just mentally, but physically. My movements became smoother, my mornings less cluttered. The small decisions that used to pull at me simply weren't there anymore. This wasn't routine in the strict sense. No schedule posted, no rules enforced, just a gentle return to what works again and again, without apology. I wasn't limiting myself. I was trusting myself. There's something deeply respectful about honouring familiarity, especially now, when the body prefers predictability, when the mind rests more easily in known rhythms. Repeating meals or timings becomes a way of saying, I know what supports me. I noticed the calm first, a steadiness that stayed with me through the day. And then I noticed the absence of boredom. The fear that repetition would dull life simply didn't arrive. Instead, I found myself more present, more attentive to small changes within the familiar. The light shifts differently even when the meal is the same. My body feels different in the same clothes depending on the day. Familiarity didn't flatten experience, it gave it a steady background. What changed wasn't the repetition itself, but how I felt about it. I stopped defending it, I stopped explaining, I let it be enough. And in doing that, I realized something gently surprising. Calm doesn't come from constant change. Sometimes it comes from returning to what already knows you, from letting repetition hold you steady while the rest of life moves around it. That feeling stays with me now, quiet and reassuring, asking nothing more than to be noticed. Habit 6 lives in the quiet part of the day when the light begins to soften and the body starts to turn inward. It shows up not as a task, but as a feeling, the sense that I don't want to carry everything forward with me into tomorrow. Evenings used to feel unfinished in a restless way, not because something was wrong, but because so many small things were left open. A cup on the table, papers where they landed, clothes set aside with the thought of later. None of it heavy on its own, yet together they formed a low hum of questions waiting for morning. What began to change was not my effort, but my attention. I started closing a few loops before the day ended, not all of them. Just enough. A gentle reset, done at the pace my body allowed. Returning the cup, straightening one surface, placing tomorrow's clothes where I wouldn't have to think about them again. There was no list, no checklist to complete. It felt more like listening for what wanted to rest. Some evenings that meant doing very little. Other nights, one small action seemed to quiet several thoughts at once. The realization came slowly. Ending the day doesn't require finishing it. It requires preparing the ground for what comes next. When I let a few things settle before sleep, my mind followed. It stopped rehearsing. It loosened its grip. I noticed how my body responded. My shoulders dropped earlier. My breath deepened sooner. Sleep came without the feeling of being chased by tomorrow's questions. Not because everything was handled, but because enough was. There's a tenderness to this habit, especially now when energy thins toward evening and the body asks for kindness instead of productivity. Closing loops became a way of honoring that request, of saying, "You've done enough for today." Some nights the reset is barely visible, a single object placed back, a thought written down so it doesn't have to stay awake. Other nights it's simply choosing to stop, to leave the rest for daylight. What I've come to understand is this: when fewer questions are left for the morning arrives differently, softer, less demanding, as if the day itself is grateful not to start mid-conversation. I don't aim for perfect endings. I aim for gentle ones. I let the day settle the way a room does when the lights are dimmed and nothing else is asked of it. And as I move toward rest, there's a quiet sense that tomorrow will meet me with a little less weight. And that feels like enough to carry into sleep. As I sit here now, I notice something simple but steady. None of these habits were about becoming better or more efficient or more disciplined. They didn't ask me to improve my life. They quietly asked my life to ask less of me. That difference matters more than I expected. I'm back in the same place where the day began. The light has shifted. The house sounds different now. Nothing around me has changed in any obvious way. The same rooms, the same objects, the same body, moving at the pace it moves these days, but inside there's more space. Fewer loose thoughts pulling at me, less mental noise competing for attention. It feels steadier here, not lighter in a dramatic sense, but calmer, as if the day no longer needs constant supervision. I'm not holding as much in my head. I'm not preparing for every possible question before it arrives. And that leaves room for something quieter. Noticing, breathing, simply being where I am. The one thing I keep coming back to is this: ease doesn't usually come from adding one more habit, one more rule, one more effort. It comes from removing decisions that don't deserve our energy anymore. From choosing kindness toward our time and attention, especially now. I'm grateful you spent this time with me. Shared spaces like this matter. You don't have to carry everything alone, and you don't have to rush through your days to prove anything. If this felt supportive, you're always welcome to return. We'll keep meeting life gently, one quieter moment at a time.